First slide. Okay, what is an HOT lane? Well, it stands for high occupancy toll lane, and it is based upon the concept that any vehicle meeting the number of occupants requirement in the vehicle may use the HOT lane for free. Any vehicle not having the minimum number of occupants must pay a toll. Presently, the proposed HOT lane minimum occupant requirement in the vehicle is 3 people. Therefore, any vehicle with 3 or more people may use the HOT lane with no charge. Now, for those vehicles that do not have a minimum of 3 people, a toll will be charged. And the amount of the toll will vary during the day based upon the level of traffic congestion in the HOT lane. If the level of congestion is low, then the tolls will be low. And conversely, if the level of congestion is high, the tolls will be higher. Now, HOT lane advocates say also that these lanes will offer drivers a choice and they will manage congestion. How will the HOT lanes work? Next slide. Only the HOT lanes will be monitored with electronic measures, video measures, and law enforcement visual methods. The remaining free general purpose lanes will not be monitored by these methods. It is intended that drivers in the HOT lane will have transponders in their vehicles and have the tolls deducted from prepaid accounts. There will be no toll booths. Any vehicle using the HOT lane without a transponder will have the license plate photographed and will be mailed a bill. Now, I realize that now you probably have an awful lot of questions, so I'd like to introduce Mr. Kurt Naas, who will begin a more in-depth presentation.
Thanks, man. Good evening. Again, I'd like to add my thanks for everybody coming out here. I know it's a rainy night, and we're just thrilled with the turnout that you see. Can we go to the next slide, Sharon? At the risk of stating the obvious, it helps to get us all on the same page about what is the problem. And can you all hear me if I turn like this? Okay. So, like I said, at the risk of stating the obvious, if we're going northbound, the problem is right here at the Huntersville squeeze, where you have 5 lanes squeezed into 2, and the traffic backs up, as you know, for miles back southbound behind that. The problem southbound is we have traffic coming on at exits 36, soon to be exits 35, 33, 31, 30, 28, 25, and 23. Did I get all those? And by the time you get down to South Huntersville, of course, the road is way over capacity and the traffic backs up, sometimes up past Davidson. It's been that way for a number of years, and the federal government has a rating system for traffic. They call it a service level. And this is rated as service level F, which is the worst service level that there is. In fact, it's been that way for years, so it's probably like an F- or something like that. And so it kind of begs the question, well, okay, if it's bad and it's been that way for years, why can't we get it widened? And the answer is there isn't any money to do it, and there's no priority to do it. So now that begs another question. If there's no priority, who sets the priority and why is that? Priorities are set by a group called MUMPO, that stands for Mecklenburg Union Metropolitan Planning Organization. And they have a process they go through, and they rolled up their list in 2010 for this section here, and we'll talk about these 2 phases in a moment. But they rolled up their process, and at the end of that process, widening this section of road here came in at number 92 on their list of priority of things to do. Now, why that is, I don't have time to go through. If you'd like to ask me that in the Q&A, I'd love to spend some time talking about that. But that's where it is. I want to take a pause here for a moment and talk about these 2 phases, because it's been reported in some of the weeklies that all we care about is getting lanes up to exit 28. That is absolutely not the case. We're advocating to get general purpose lanes from exit 23 all the way up to exit 26. And we have some folks here from Iredell. Thank you so much for coming here. 36, excuse me. Thank you. And for keeping me on this phone. We have some, like I said, some folks from Iredell. You know, we recognize that you're part of the solution with this, because you're also part of the problem. But every study that we've seen, when we take a look at this, is if we have to break it up in phases, and remember we said we don't have any money, right? You do this is phase 1, and this is phase 2. Now some folks have said, you know what, if all you do with this is you just move the bottleneck north. You move the bottleneck from exit 23 to exit 28. Again, I don't have time to go through this. I'll throw this out there. If you ask me that in the Q&A, I would love to talk about that a bit more at length. All right, so what happened? Well, now we're going to get a brief history. Go to the next slide, Sharon. So what happened was, after this came at number 92 on Muckle's list of things to do, is they said, well, maybe some folks there, maybe we can get creative and we can add a toll to that. And this is an actual page from a consultant study that was done in 2010. And they said, you know, they came up with 2 options. This one here is actually completely kind of gone away. We're still talking about TIPIA in another aspect. But the study that came out in 2010 said, okay, well, we can get $22 million of revenue for the tolls that can help pay for the construction. And now what we have is this funding gap. Go to the next slide, Sharon. Sharon? All right, so I'm going to fast forward a couple years, and I apologize. I know this is the least readable chart in the presentation. But we're going to go fast forward a couple years, and what happened about a year ago this time is we started talking about, well, maybe we could get a private company to do what's called a design, build, operate, which is basically, we have now private equity that's entered into this, and they're going to take the risk for doing this. This is an actual snippet of a page of what's called a TIP, that stands for Transportation Improvement Plan. And there are pages and pages and pages of this, and this is a page out of Muckle's TIP. And what you see here is we assign each project a number, and then there's a brief description of the project. And I know that's tough to read, but that's basically what we're talking about is the stretch that we just said was the problem. And then you have these sources of funding, and then you have what those amounts are. And if you look across here, here's this bond here. So there's your $22 million, okay? And now that we're talking about toll lanes, we have $7 million. Where's that come from? That NHS stands for National Highway System. So that's public money. Then we have CMAQ. That stands for Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality. That's another bucket of public money. And that's $15 million. And then we have this NHS here of another $20 million. So we said we had the money, we had the money, toll, boom. All of a sudden, $42 million showed up. Now, I gave a presentation similar to this around Christmas time, and so I had a Christmas wish, and my Christmas wish was, what if instead we use that money for general purpose things? Now, what kind of gap are we looking at? Well, here's the National Highway System public money, the CMAQ money, and we have a gap of about $13 million. Now, granted, that public money comes with strings attached, all right? And we'll talk about those strings here in a little bit. I didn't get my Christmas wish, so I guess on the scale of 9 to nice, I know where I stand with Santa, and we move on to the next one. So here's the proposal, all right? Remember we said it had a number, the 5405? So this is what's called Transportation Improvement Plan 5405. And what that plan is we're going to add hot lanes here, and what we're going to do is we're going to convert those HOV lanes, you know, the carpool lanes that go once you get into Charlotte, okay? So we're going to convert those as well into hot lanes. Now, if you think about it, you only get paid on a hot lane by the mile, right? The more miles you have, the more that you're able to make. And once we have this private company involved, all of a sudden we see all these things start to happen in order to make the hot lane model work. And this is what I call feeding the hot lane monster. So we started with this, and if we go to the next slide, please. And right now, here's where we're at. So we've got 27 miles of hot lanes. It starts in downtown Charlotte, and now we've got hot lanes going, proposed, all the way up to Mooresville. And there's also talk of extending from Mooresville on up to Statesville. The cost, remember we said we had a $13 million gap? The cost is now, this was actually when we observed this morning, $550 million. Why is that? We have a lot of information in our research, and we're going to focus on these 2 projects in the south here. So let's look at these 2 projects, the 5405 and the 3311. Next slide, please. So if I look at this stretch, okay, remember we had the HOV to hot lane conversion. That's $7 million. All right, but We have now one but two hot lanes in that direction. And remember we said that if one hot lane is $50 million, that was our phase one. So if one hot lane is one lane is $50 million, the second lane is going to be somewhere around $50 million. Actually, it's going to be more because they're going to have to redo some bridges. But we said because we don't know what that number is, we'll make a conservative argument in favor of the opposition. We'll say that's $50 million. All right? Why do you need two hot lanes? You need two hot lanes because those external lanes, they basically act like acceleration-deceleration lanes. Think about it. If you're going down, if you get on Mecklenburg Avenue and you look down it and you see there's this, long trail of red lights going into Huntersville, and you think, you know what, I want to jump on a hot lane this morning. Well, if you have one lane, you got traffic bombing by you at 60 miles an hour, and you're basically at a dead stop. It's not a safe situation. And you have the opposite when you're going northbound. So if you're coming up from downtown, and you're in a hot lane, you're going 60 miles an hour, all of a sudden you have to slow down to 20 miles an hour, whatever traffic is going in the general purpose lanes. And so it doesn't make the hot lane model work in that case. So what you really need are two hot lanes to do the job of one general purpose lane. So that's another $50 million. Next slide, please. All right, so now let's look at the southern region. As part of this process, there's part of the proposal is to do what's called the I-77 connector. The idea behind that is that you don't want to commingle the hot lane traffic with the general purpose lane traffic. So we're talking about now reworking this interchange here so that you can get direct hot lane traffic into downtown Charlotte. We don't know what the price tag is on this. I just put 4-star restaurant up here because we haven't been able to find that in publicly available information. Also, there are these lanes here in downtown Charlotte. Those lanes are 18 inches too narrow. And at some point, somebody, somewhere, promised to someone in some government agency that we're going to do anything in 77, we need to widen those lanes. And you, dear Lake Norman commuter, get to widen those lanes through your tolls at a cost of $16.5 million. There's also a number of environmental issues associated with this area. There's an abandoned pedestrian overpass, there's an abandoned elementary school, there's a creek bed, there's a dilapidated cemetery, there's FEMA property, and there's some low-income housing that all needs to be dispositioned in some way in order to make this whole thing work. So I just gave you kind of a bunch of numbers and a bunch of concepts all jumbled together. What does this look like if we add all this up? Next slide, please. I'm sorry. Before we do that, it begs the question, next slide, that's fine. It begs the question, we're cleaning up cemeteries and raising elementary schools. What does any of that have to do with our original problem of moving traffic through Lake Norman? Next slide. Let's go ahead and add some of those things up now. All right. We're missing a column, aren't we? That's all right. This is the easy column. General purpose lanes. We said the construction cost is $50 million. This drops right down that number here, which is right back here, is $50 million. All right. We say it's going to be the same for the hot lanes, but we talked about H should be a hot lane conversion, $7 million. Additional hot lane, another $50 million. Wide lanes to Charlotte, I-77 connector, cleaning up downtown. Now, there's a couple other things that I didn't tell you about. It costs money to operate these hot lanes. And the latest number that we saw was about $2 million a year. That number is actually low, and we'll find out that it's seriously low as we look at some other examples around here. But we said $2 million, current year dollars. The contract is for 50 years. Did I understand, by the way, the gentleman with the contract? So if I do $2 million times 50 years, current year dollars, over the life of this thing, we're going to be spending $100 million in operating costs. Now, remember, this is a private-public partnership. You'll hear us refer to this as a P3. That company's not doing this because they're nice guys. They're doing this because they want to make money. The minimum return on equity that they're looking at, I've read, is around 15%. They're really looking for something in the 20% type thing. We said 20% of $550 million, just to make a round number, is another $100 million bucks. So what you see is you have over $300 million to feed the hot lane monster, if you will, to make this concept work, which is 6 times what it would be if we did a general purpose lane through that same region. Next slide, please. Now, some of you may be saying, you know what, look, as William said, hot lanes would give us a choice, all right? If I don't want to use the lane, I'm not going to pay to use it. Let's set aside some salient points on that first. Let's set aside for the fact that I-77 has never been widened since it was put in. You know it was put in the mid-70s? So we have not had, and in fact, we haven't widened 115, we put 21 under the lake, and Bates Ford is still 2 lanes. So we haven't had a single improvement in north-south connectivity for the last 40 years. Let's set aside that fact. Let's also set aside the fact that we only use that logic that I pay for a road that I use. We only use that, it seems like, when it comes to this. When it comes to I-77. Did any of you come here and say, you know, I drove here on Catawba Avenue, I should have paid to drive on Catawba Avenue? I don't think so. All right? We selectively use this logic because we can't get this way basically any other way. So let's put those points aside for a minute, and let's talk about what we're talking about if you still want to pay to use the road. This is basically another way of looking at that table I just presented. Here's the cost of construction. Here's all the other stuff. So basically what you're doing is you're paying for a whole pizza, if you want to do that, and what you're doing is you're getting a slice. And if you like that concept, I would like to take you out for a pizza dinner. Go to the next slide. All right, so let's talk again about that general purpose lane, just to kind of bring that point home. We roll all this up. We said it was somewhere around 300 million, even though we didn't include some big ticket items. We said there were $37 million in public funds, again with strings attached. A $13 million funding gap, and by the time all is said and done, and most of us are actually going to be in the ground, it's going to end up costing us over $300 million. So I get to this point in the presentation, I have to relax, I have to get away from the PowerPoint, and we'll talk a little bit about driver behavior. Let's say at some point, some unhappy day in the future, these things actually get built, all right? And you're going up out of downtown Charlotte, and you're in the general purpose lane. When are you going to use a hot lane? Look, if you're going 60, 70 miles an hour, you're going to stay in the general purpose lane. The only time you're going to stay, or you're going to pay to use the hot lane, is when the lane you're in is congested. And in fact, the more congested it gets, the more you're going to be willing to pay. And it's this behavior that is actually at the center of the hot lane business. Now, we get some useful insights when we change the perspective. Imagine for a moment that you're all CEOs of this private company. What are you looking for in this project? You're looking for congestion in those general purpose lanes, right? Those lanes have to be congested in order for you to make money. You need them to be congested. I sound like Jack Nicholson. If you've met, you want those lanes to be congested. You need those lanes to be congested. All right, but they have to be congested. And the more congested they are, the more money you're going to make. Which leads us to a scenario like the next slide. This is Interstate 15, which is north of San Diego, and this made the news because somewhere up here, I guess, there was an accident. And these people here, it took them like an hour and a half to get home. What you see here is they have 2 hot lanes going in either direction, so there's 4 hot lanes going down the center there, and this made the news because the tolls there maxed out. It was this particular stretch was about 7 miles, and the tolls maxed out at $8. Now, there's an important distinction here because this is a publicly operated hot lane, okay? For the privately operated hot lane, there is no limit on how high the tolls can go. It actually makes sense if you think about it, because they have to guarantee a level of service, right? That it's going to be either 45 or 60 miles an hour is what we do. So the only way you're going to do that as demand increases is you're going to have to restrict the supply, i.e. you're going to have to increase the price. You're only going to have a certain number of cars that you're going to be able to get on there around 60 miles an hour. All right? If you're the P3 company, you want those cars to pay as high a toll as you can get. That's how you're going to make the most money. And we start to see here a fundamental disconnect between what the private company wants and what's in the best public interest. Now, how high could our tolls possibly go? Well, you know, we had some houses put in just south of us in Atlanta. If you want to go to the next slide, please, Sharon. And we did a comparison on that. And I'm going to kind of breeze through this table. But basically, they have I-85 through the northern part of the land is 6 lanes in either direction. First thing that struck us is right around Huntersville, the traffic density here per lane, because we have 4 lanes, is actually greater than what it is in Atlanta. And I suppose anybody who drives that stretch at 5 o'clock in the afternoon probably wouldn't argue with that. Their hot lane is 15 miles. We're going to have 27.5 miles. And what they did was when they put the hot lane in, it was conversion. So it was like what we had talked about. So it was a carpool lane, all right, which was a 2-person per vehicle or more. And to get people to pay, paying customers on there, they changed that to 3. Well, it's what you do is you lose about 80 to 90% of people. Think about it. It's hard enough to get a carpool partner, but to get 2 people, i.e. 3 people in a carpool, it's like it's that hardness squared or cubed or it's tough, all right? And so what happened was basically they kicked the carpoolers out of there. And so all the people that now were going there were in 2-person carpools. They're all driving separate cars. And what happens is this hot lane is actually now carrying about 4% of the total traffic through that area. All right, so we're going to move on. So this capital cost is borne by the taxpayers of the state of Georgia. This capital cost, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, is borne by hot lane users. Actually, a portion. Like I said, we'll talk about this in a minute. Their operating costs, and I'm finally getting to how high the toll is going to be. I'm sorry for the long-winded explanation. But, operating costs, they found last year, it was opened about a year ago, was around $4 million. We're saying it's going to be roughly half that. We have almost twice the number of lanes. So operating cost per mile is 0.25. We're estimating that it's going to be less than a third the operating cost of what Atlanta's experience has been. And by the way, as William said, we're a citizens group. So we're not paid consultants, and we're not public employees, and we're not public officials, elected public officials. So the data that we can get is actually limited. We don't know what the actual hot lane financials are, and the reason we don't know is because those are confidential at this point with the state. Anyway, what happened was their highest toll right now is around $6. They set new records almost every month, but if I just kind of do some arithmetic and I say, well, if I want to count my operating costs, this is roughly a third of that. We're looking at maybe a maximum total of around $18, something like that. So we talked a little bit about tolls now that again, you're still CEO of a P3 company. There's 2 other levers that you have. You have a hot lane capacity, right? You want the most capacity, and you have how restricted can you be? Is this going to be an HOV plus 2 or an HOV plus 3? If we go to the next slide, we'll take a look at that. I used to be a management consultant, so I couldn't have a presentation without 2x2 matrix in here. But anyway, what we have down here is a hot lane restriction. So a low restriction would be if we're allowing 2 persons per vehicle. A high restriction would be if we allow 3 persons per vehicle. And up here we have a hot lane capacity. Low capacity, we've got 1 lane, and a high capacity is we have 2 lanes. Let's take a look at the off diagonals for a moment. The lowest throughput is if I have and by throughput I mean that's the number of people, not the number of cars, because that's going to be basically the same, but the number of people. If I restrict a bunch of carpoolers, I'm going to have a lower throughput, and if I only have 1 lane, of course, that's when I have my lowest throughput. Interesting. This is the only time that the public and the private interests are aligned, and it's for a negative reason. If we're interested in moving traffic, we would look up here where we would have the highest capacity, 2 hot lanes, but we would allow a lot more carpoolers to go through here. But that doesn't work because, as the consultant said, the HOV2 Plus requires substantial subsidies for the state to work. Think about it. You're the CEO of a P3 company. The only thing you want in that lane is a paying customer. You just pay to design, build, operate a road. That's all you want in that lane is a paying customer. So what we find, again, another meal for the hotline monster is what's best for the P3 is they have the highest restriction and they have the highest capacity. And in fact, that's what the proposal, that's what the proposal is. So we've just laid out some logic as to why we think that the hot lanes will not relieve congestion, but like I said earlier, we're just private citizens, and so we're not transportation experts, but we have a quote from somebody who is. Next slide, please. So this is from the folks at Mount Poa, and they said hot lanes are expected to have minimal impact to the travel speed in the existing general purpose lanes. So there you have it. If you're thinking, some of you may have come in here and said, you know what, look, I just want this road wider, right? And a hot lane is better than nothing, okay? In fact, the hot lanes are going to ensure congestion. That's what the hot lane model relies on. It ensures congestion. It doesn't relieve it. And one thing that we're certainly in agreement with all across the board is that very fact. All right, so we talked about the fact that hot lanes are going to cost a lot more, and we talked about the fact that they're not going to solve our congestion problems. And there's one more issue. Again, imagine that you're the CEO of a P3 company. We'll go to the next slide, please. And let's say some happy day down the road, the state comes up with the money and we're able to, 20, 30 years down the road, and we're able to add a general purpose lane on I-77. What does that do to you as the owner of the P3 company? Well, if you put a general purpose lane in, traffic starts moving again. If traffic moves, people are paying a toll. And of course, the people who do this for a living have talked about that, and I have to write this down because I can never remember, but there's something in the contract that's called an unplanned revenue impacting facility. And what that means is if the government makes some sort of a public improvement that reduces their toll revenue, they would be entitled to a compensation event. For all intents and purposes, what that means is not only would we need to pay the construction of the general purpose lane, but we would also need to pay for the vehicles that drive on that, or at least the lost toll revenues. And again, the town of Cornelius asked the question of the experts along those lines. Next slide, please. This came up in a hot lane pre-meeting. They asked, will there ever be an opportunity to construct general purpose lanes along I-77 under the pre-3 scenario? And you never know that no is spelled Y-E-S, but this answer kind of says it. Again, it comes from the folks at MUMPO. The answer is technically yes, but it would certainly cost the public much more than the cost of construction, and would be an ongoing cost through the life of the contract. So we've seen that hot lanes cost a lot more, they don't relieve congestion, and they put us in a contractual straitjacket for the next 50 years. So that's how it affects you as a community. Now, how does it affect us as an economy, as a region? We'll go to the next slide, please. What we did was we looked at some other hot lane examples, and to try and get an idea of that. This is California 91 in Orange County. It's about 10 lanes. If you're going east-west in Orange County, you're driving on about 91 as opposed to California. We talked a little bit about I-85 in Atlanta. We talked a little bit about I-15 in San Diego. US 290 in Houston goes up to the northwestern suburbs. Those are bedroom communities up there. That's a 3-lane reversible hot lane in either direction. I bring those up for a number of reasons. Number one, because there's a lot of information available about it. And number two, because I've driven on all of them. And what you find pretty quickly, if you're there from a business perspective, is if you know that there's a lane or a road that has a hot lane or a toll lane, that is like a red flag that those general purpose lanes are congested, right? I mean, we just learned that the hot lanes rely on the congestion to work. So if I'm in one of these regions, I say, okay, that has a hot lane, bad congestion. Is there another route to go? The other thing is, if you think about it from a business perspective, say you're going to relocate a business, that says, what the hot lane says is that the government cannot, or they will not be able to provide a general purpose lane solution. And there may be a number of reasons for that, but that basically just screams intractable problem. All right, so now let's compare these, and we're going to tee this up for a minute, to what we're talking about, I-77 through Lake Norman. Next slide, please. And let's face it, look, the folks that are going to use the hot lanes are Mooresville, maybe in Statesville, Mooresville, Davidson, Cornelius, Huntersville. The combined population is 150,000. What does that mean as far as the burden that we're asking to put on each one of you as individuals? If you go to the next slide. So what we did was we looked at each one of the lanes that I just talked about. And you look at, here's Lake Norman down here. We have the longest of the hot lanes There's this surge population. I should talk about that for a minute. Orange County, like I said, if you're going east-west in Orange County, you're on the 91. In Houston, that serves the entire northwest quadrant. That's 1.5 million people. Atlanta, it serves Athens. You've got Norcross, you've got Gainesville, and you've got everything basically going down to the perimeter that feeds into that. San Diego is what's called the Inland Empire, which is literally millions and millions and millions of homes up in thousands, up in the northeastern section of San Diego County. So you see, and here we're talking about 150,000 people compared to this. These are all publicly operated or privately operated. This actually isn't a little mixed bag on 91. Actually, that was actually built as a privately operated one in the mid 90s. It cost around $130 million, something like that. As part of that, they had a 10-year ban on any improvements in the corridor. And I don't remember how all that worked, but somebody sued somebody, and the county or the transit authority ended up buying it back for like $100 million more than what it cost, like 10 years later. But the private company still operates that. So I don't know if we want to call that public or private or a mess, but that's what it is. All right. Do the tolls pay for construction? Well, the taxpayers pay for construction on these. We're expected to cover some of those construction costs for us. What does that mean as far as a benefit? As a burden? There's a number of ways you could look at that. If you think about like Social Security, have you seen those charts where the Roosevelt administration were 30 workers to support one beneficiary, and now I don't know, there's 2 or 3 or something like that to support one beneficiary. So the fewer number of workers that you have, the more the burden is on those workers, right? There's kind of an analogy we could look at that with hotlines. Next slide, please. Where if we look at the population supporting 1 mile of hotlines, well, we have several thousand people supporting 1 mile of hot lane, and here we're asking for 5,000 people to support 1 mile of hot lane, which is basically we're 15 times greater than what the next lowest number is. There's another way to look at that, and that is how dollar-wise, or what are we talking about in terms of, if everybody shared the burden equally, what would the dollar per resident be? We go to the next slide. And we have some good data on 77 versus 85, so we'll take a look at that. So the capital cost, remember we said was $550 million. I-85, that's paid for by the state of Georgia, all the taxpayers. So if we do our arithmetic, 50 years, means we have $11 million to cover the capital costs per year. Now, don't know how that's going to be advertised, maybe it's end-loaded, don't know, but on average, that's going to be $11 million a year. We said, based on what we looked at with Atlanta, the $2 million a year was kind of fictional, so we said $3 million for operating costs, and we have to cover profit. Atlanta, they had $4 million, even though they had about half a population, and they don't have to pay a profit. So what you see is we have to have $16 million a year on average, and the Atlanta hotline has $4 million a year. This really jumps out at you when you look at that on a per-person basis, because remember, the served area of Atlanta is much, much larger than what we're talking about here. And we looked at these numbers, and we couldn't figure out what we're doing wrong. We might be missing something. Full disclosure, we don't know. But in Atlanta, it's about 0.3% per person, and the annual liability for hotlines in Lake Norman area is $107 per person. What are we missing? We have a couple of ideas, and if you go to the next slide, this is our most speculative chart, quite frankly. But we're trying to figure out how the hotlane model can work, given the cost and given the amount of people that there are to support it. What's going on maybe is that this model is going to be end-loaded, and they're expecting tremendous future congestion. And so who knows how high the tolls are going to go, but that's one possibility that they're counting on a pretty high toll. The other is maybe it is that there can be a future taxpayer subsidy for this, like bailout. About a year ago, there was an NCDOT engineer in a meeting, and he said, well, the taxpayers could be on the hook for somewhere between $25 and $100 million, something like that. He didn't know a reporter was in the room. And the next day, it ended up in the Observer, and they kind of tried to walk that back. But there is, again, we haven't seen, we don't know, we don't look inside the contract, but there is that possibility that there could be a tax bill associated. The other is that there's significant money put into the project. In fact, if you read this morning's Observer, they said that of the $550 million, there's $170 million of public money that's going into this. Now let's think about that for a minute, all right? There's $170 million of public money. If we wanted to build, the estimates that we have, if we wanted to build pot lines from general purpose lines from 23 to 36, that would be $130 million. There's $170 million of public money. There's $130 million to build the general purpose lanes. Am I like begging a dumb question here? Now, granted, that $170 million, I'm sure, comes with strings attached to it. It has to. All right. But again, looking at this from the citizen's perspective, we say, you know what? We're going to spend $170 million on a $130 million solution that's going to cost us $550 million. And not only that, there's another $200 million in operating costs and profit on that. So you can see why, as a citizen's perspective, we're kind of frustrated about it. Next slide, please. All right. Now, again, let's imagine that you're a CEO of a company now, and you're looking to locate a business in the area. And let's say, you know what, you've decided on the Carolinas, all right? And I picked two areas. I picked basically equidistant from the Charlotte Douglas International Airport, and you know, certainly there are a number of things that go into making a business move. One of the most important is the cost of doing business, and one of the costs of doing business is the tax structure. Well, if you look at the corporate income tax in South Carolina, that's lower. If you look at the gas tax, that's lower. If you look at the gas plus state excise tax, that's lower. South Carolina has the 47th highest gas tax in the country. North Carolina has the 6th highest. South Carolina has a lower sales tax. Interesting on the sales tax. Part of that sales tax covers what's called a pennies for progress. Have you ever wondered why, when you're down at Carolines and you cross the South Carolina border, and all of a sudden the 77 goes into 8 lanes? They have something that they call pennies for progress, which is there's a portion of that sales tax that they collect within the county for roads. And that was key to leveraging that money for the state and the federal dollars to be able to widen that stretch of road. We have an 8.75% sales tax. That includes a half-cent transportation sales tax. Did y'all know that? Did y'all know that you have a half-cent transportation sales tax? That goes to primarily paying for the Blue Line and for bus service. And yes, we have had some enhanced bus service here, but the fact is we basically get pennies on the dollar. I'm coming back to the government for that. All right, so if you're a CEO and you're looking at this and you say, you know what, lower taxes, and there's 8 general purpose lanes there, and there's a toll lane in Lake Norman. So you're starting at this basically at a structural disadvantage. But say, you know what, for whatever reason, we overcome that and we want to locate the business in Mecklenburg County. Go to the next slide. This is Widen I-77's view of Mecklenburg County, and for those of you from Iredell, we couldn't get a chart from Iredell, but you can imagine this basically goes up here. But if I want to understand, where's my business relies on any kind of logistics or transportation, you know, I'm going to locate somewhere on here, and locate here, here when that's done. The last place I'm going to do is right on here. Remember what we talked about earlier? If you have a toll lane, that signals you got congestion on that lane and you have an intractable problem. All right? This screams bedroom community. All right? And why is that important? Because it's important because if we're not able to attract businesses here, then people are going to live here and they're going to work here. Look, one of the ways to reduce traffic and reduce congestion is to have people live near where they work. The other is good zoning, but that's another issue. So we think that as looking at this from a business perspective, you're looking at you have a higher tax rate, we have less infrastructure, and we think that it's going to basically doom us to be a bedroom community. If I go to the next slide. All right, so I know we have some state officials here, and I mean this in all sincerity, I'm glad you're here. Because you are ultimately going to be the solution for this. Obviously, we've expressed our dissatisfaction with this. I want to express my dissatisfaction in one more point, and then we'll talk about how we can work together. But this is from an NCDOT presentation. This came just off the presses back about 10 days ago, on January 4th. And they're talking about the project here, okay? And the project begins where we talked about earlier, which is where we go from downtown Charlotte up to Mooresville. And I circled this because it really stood out in this. So look, the southern section is at the heart of the value proposition for the project by providing critical direct access to 277 and decreasing user travel time in and out of downtown Charlotte. Now here we are in Lake Norman. We started this whole thing, that's the lake, this blue thing. We started this by saying remember that back in 2010, how do we get traffic through Lake Norman? And the state is saying the critical part of this is getting traffic in and out of downtown Charlotte. If you're from the state here, I hope you can sense some of the frustration that the group has around this particular issue. All right, so if we're going to sum this up, next slide, please. Islands and I-77 are going to cost a lot more than the general purpose lanes. There's a whole bunch of things that we need to do to make this hot lane model work, to be the hot lane monster, if you will. As we learn, they're going to insure the gist rather than relieving it. They're going to put us in a contractual straitjacket, and it's going to be for the next 50 years. And we think it sends a bad message for businesses that they want to locate here, and we're already at a tax disadvantage. So we have some inspired words here. We say it's an expensive non-solution that limits future improvements and negatively impacts our economy. And it's especially disappointing when the state thinks the most important thing is to get traffic in and out of downtown Charlotte. So in our book, we call that a calamity. All right. Now why do we put the word imminent calamity? Next slide, please. Here's the imminent part. So in 4 days, they're going to start meeting with the private companies. The proposals for the private companies are due back in July, and they're going to down select from that, and they're set to close the contract in September. So this is upon us, and we need to act, and we need to act quickly. And we don't want to come to this state and say, you know what, we don't want hot lanes, just hot lanes. We want to be part of the solution. And as part of that, Vince is going to talk a little bit about, we've talked about the reservations that we have in the hot lane model and what we'd like going forward. We have a couple more slides, and then we'll get to the Q&A.
Thank you, Kurt. Kurt has been, I'm in awe of this guy and how hard he's worked to learn about this issue and help communicate it. My name is Vince Weinberger. I live in Davidson. I've been watching this toll issue for several years, trying to figure out what was going to happen with it. I've seen some studies that the NCDOT was doing. Studies sound like they're not very frightening. You expect your government to learn about an issue and then before they implement it, and then have a conversation after the study to make sure that they're doing the right thing. And to me, the user fee concept of tolling seems appropriate. I mean, we're running out of money to do this job of building our infrastructure. So those user fees associated with tolling seemed reasonable to me. But then I saw the implementation schedule that you see up here. And I said, this is no longer talking, this is doing. And this will be done by the end of the year. It's basically approved by our MOPO. They voted on it. And the towns have supported it. The state supports it. It's going to happen unless our leaders take action to turn this around. And after you see what Kurt just presented, can you imagine 5 or 10 years from now if this actually happens? We're going to look back at 2013 and say, what were we doing? What were we thinking about in 2013? Where were our leaders in 2013 when this was happening to us? And that's what we're going to ask our leaders to do. What we want our leaders to do from Mooresville, Davidson, Cornelius, and Huntersville is to convene an ad hoc committee to investigate alternative solutions to the P3 hot lane option. We would like to recommend general purpose lanes as that alternative, but let's get out there and have that conversation and not institute the P3 hot lane concept. We also need to convince NCDOT to put the brakes on and postpone awarding the contract until all alternatives have been vetted. But what can we do as citizens? Many of you here tonight came and are here to learn about it. That's a great first step. We ask you to go to Widen, I-77.org. On there are a number of different links where you can validate what Kurt has just presented. You'll see also on there opportunities to go to other parts of the country and see how those citizens have received their hot lanes. It's not a very popular concept in these areas. We are also having a Widen I-77 working session next Monday night upstairs in 7 p.m. You're welcome to join us at that and help us plan our next steps of outreach to our public, our citizens, and our leaders. What else can you do? You can go to our website, Widen I-77. Contact us via the Widen I-77@hotmail.com, our email address. We'll get you on our blog. And then we're also, Sharon's very proud of that.
50 people on Facebook.
50 people like us. So that's real positive. And while we're talking to Sharon, she's now going to lead us in a question, comment, and answer session.